Morning, world. Give you a little update on the recent events that have taken place. Yesterday, I had to make myself present to address a few things that were being said that was intentionally being misleading. So I'll address these things one by one.
Intellectual property, I'm not going to say, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but for our VPA program, and so I had some questions, and a very interesting topic because we have our VPA program, and I think we are all on the email that had mentioned, had suggested as to some of the reasons why, and it's if you have, to sign this. Is it waiver, an agreement? It's I know that we're involved with film, film contests and some of that. And so it had raised the question. So I understand when there's multiple parties involved, I started to ask, well, what does it mean? I mean, do we require it? And I haven't read it. But if it's just in standalone individual students, obviously, I think it's just important from the
You will see that school board attorney is or has stated that he's not an intellectual property attorney, in that they assigned someone that was an intellectual property attorney for advice. They sought out advice. Remember that. They sought out advice. And I addressed to Art Hardy yesterday that you are, in fact, not an intellectual property attorney. Doug Cherry is an intellectual property attorney. However, Doug Cherry doesn't work for any school. He's a professional. So his business and business dealings are related more to the professional world, not the educational sense. I brought this up yesterday in my 3 minutes speaking to Art Hardy.
Sure, I can give a little bit of information because I am not an intellectual property lawyer, which is why we've associated Doug Cherry with the Shoemaker firm, who is a very good intellectual property lawyer, to help with
I also said to Art Hardy and the school board, the panel, that I am a professional in this area, educated by Purdue University. I know about intellectual property. I know about rights, copyrights, patents, trademarks. That's my field of study. It's not a broad, generalized topic. It's a specific field.
And he has, since last summer, I believe, been involved with Booker High School because issues were raised when one of their films that the students and faculty had produced were going to be entered into a festival, I believe, Into the Storm. And there were some issues because, what I am told, is that pretty much everybody who works on a film, including camera people and others, not just the perhaps author of the script, arguably at least has copyright, intellectual property rights in the creation. And so what we asked Doug to do was to give us some advice on.
So Art Hardy just said they asked Doug Cherry for advice. Advice. Sometimes we get good advice, sometimes we don't get good advice. He gave you advice from a professional standpoint. Nothing that had to do with more of the educational standpoint and how it affects certain players. Because we will then get to a point where you then talk about how the wording may be broad. Well, if the wording is broad and it's affecting, or it's now in a educational setting, you then allowed something that cast a huge net over students, not those getting paid for this, but over students. So again, he gave you his advice, maybe his recommendation, but that would have been a recommendation for me as a business owner dealing with another person or private person, not anything dealing with students in an educational setting. Again, that's from me as a professional that's well versed in what I'm talking about, that has done everything that this film program is doing, from design, animation, film, and more so myself, what I've done in life. But I just want to let you know that I've always been trying to help this situation. Always been trying to help the situation. That's why I have been trying to give remedies that no one seems to wanted to have listened to. You made a decision and you put that thing in the schools. And as me, as the parent, a concerned parent that read it, that knows about contracts, spoke to you specifically at the meeting, letting you know words mean something. So when you put something that has legal jargon into a contract for students to sign, you or any attorney should know that word is law. There's no guessing as to what that means. There is no, well, the hypothetical on this, the hypothetical on that. No, that's not how the law works. That's not how contracts work. Contracts are strict and binding for a reason. It doesn't take an attorney to figure that out. You can have an attorney educational background, and we can know the same facts.
His advice was we needed to get releases from the participants, their parents, because they're mostly minors, so that the school board did control the right to use those group projects for purposes of things like entering them into film festivals and the like.
Just to state another point of fact, you mentioned film festivals, which is very interesting because I mentioned that in our meeting September 23rd, that this was one of the reasons why this thing needed to be signed. Actually, because they said it needed to be under sole ownership. This is what we've been told. And that's not true. You, anybody can enter a group into a film festival. It doesn't have to be under one name or one controlling entity. Sundance Film Festival, which is called the granddaddy of them all in the United States, they don't require it. Tribeca, they don't require it. Austin Film Festival, they don't require it. So there's a little more level of knowledge that needs to be obtained by the individuals that's trying to make these decisions, because it's not actually truthful. What happened with the little Into the Storm, that became a little personal issue. And now it is morphed into, let's take control of everything created. Again, any attorney that decides to submit something to be placed into a school should know what the language says. That's our trust in you. You should know what that language says. Let's not say, well, we need to go back and revisit it now. You should have looked over it multiple times. You should have had other people look over it multiple times. You should have sent it out maybe as a rough draft to somebody else. But here we are in this situation because of the legal jargon that was chosen by Sarasota County Schools and Booker High School. And now it has a direct impact and effect on my son's educational experience at Booker High School.
The flip side of that is also there are occasions on which we are given license to produce films, and we often are given those licenses under very strict parameters about what we can do with them, i.e., we can use them for the educational purposes, but not to make money.
Also, like how he did a little spin-off and say, well, we then sometimes we get licenses from other artists, meaning professional artists, that would allow a school to use their work, but there's special parameters that they have to abide by. And they don't want to go outside of those parameters. That's an interesting point. That's a very interesting point, because these are the same parameters that you should be having on yourself when it comes to our students. I'm glad you made that point, because you just devalued what our students do and made it seem as if somebody that has been doing this for multiple years, or as a professional, has more value than our students. Those are your words, not mine. Those are your words.
So we also need to be able to control the property in that context, so that we don't violate our agreement with the artist who created the content in the first place. So that is the purpose of this. It is not to make money for the school, but to allow these group projects to be used for the benefit, certainly of the school, but also of all the students involved.
Goes on. I'm loving this. I actually really enjoy that part that you put out, because you don't want to violate your agreement with the artist. Think about what you just said. You don't want to violate an agreement with that said artist, because they've given you a copyright license, or they basically leased the license to where you can use their work. This is the same thing that I am pushing for these kids. This is the identical thing that I am pushing for. There are parameters set for the school board. For the school board. These kids are the ones that make the decision. Just like those artists that you just referred to, that would allow the license and give you parameters and all this other kind of stuff. And you said that when there's a professional that you get this lease from, there's no money to be made. Correct. But what you didn't say is that you can still make money off of these students, because they don't have the parameters that the professionals have. So this is where you're dealing with a person that is entrenched in the knowledge of design, in the knowledge of ownership, in the knowledge of copyright and rights in general. You just made a huge separation between our students that are lesser for some reason, and then somebody that's a quote unquote professional. Your words. So let's make sure we state a fact. You may not get money from signing a contract that Stephen King has, which is valid because Stephen King is reputable. He's allowing these kids to get experience by using some of his work to recreate and do short stories. That is all fine and dandy, and that's positive. That is very positive. And I'll go for that every day. But what I won't go for is how you just said that there's no money that is made, where you contradicted yourself. There's no money that is to be made for the school. The school makes no money. When in essence, if these little animation projects or short stories or short films do make it to the big screen that are not controlled under certain parameters by a professional, you do actually profit from it. You do actually profit from it. You can call it a fundraiser, you call it whatever you want to, but you do actually profit from it. None of it's free. None of the viewings, none of it's free. So this is what happens when you deal with the actual parent that knows the actual facts behind this. Person that actually went to school and has knowledge about this. So there's a little bit of some misleading things that are being said. And those are the fact. Said it's not for the benefit of the school, but certainly for the benefit of the school and all the students. Before your contract, Booker High School, Sarasota County Schools, the kids had entered in things before. That's a fact. Kids had made short stories, videos, video short stories with animations, all of that. I've been present for the showcases and other things, as a parent should be. So when you want to talk about this one instance that now controls everything, because this thing was pretty big, that last documentary was pretty big, and now you seek to have sole ownership, I think you need to check the wording of that work for hire / assignment of copyright, because that is not a waiver. You're making it seem like it's a waiver where we go to a amusement park and we sign a waiver that holds nobody liable. That means nobody will be at fault if anything goes wrong. That's not the kind of waiver that you're referring to. That's my assumption. But in general terms, that is what the waiver is. That is what a waiver or release is. When you take your kid to the skate park, you sign a waiver. That doesn't mean you're giving the skate park all your rights. No, you're just not holding them liable if anything happens. Sorry. Words do matter. And as attorneys should know, as educators should know, as everybody should know, words do matter. Words have a huge effect. And so we should all know what we're saying and know what we're writing before we say it and or write it, especially when it deals with young people. Because again, my son has now been kicked off of his film project that he worked on for 7+ weeks as the assistant director because of this thing that you say you need to have for these kids to produce films, which is not at all true. It has nothing to do with education. And if it doesn't enter a film festival, so be it. Every kid is not going to be a straight A student. They should strive for it. Every kid is not going to go to the NBA or the WNBA. They should surely strive for it. Hopefully every kid can make it into college. Will it happen? The reality is there'll be other paths that they'll take. So let's not make it seem as if these kids somehow would object to their being in a program for actual viewing. For viewing. If you want to have a job with someone and you create films, short stories, got a pretty good storyboard, you're a pretty good writer, you want it to be seen. Animation, you want Pixar or Disney to pick that up. Film guys and girls, you want one of those top directors that may be a female to see, hey, this is a young up and coming female. I want her on my set as an intern. I want to help her. I want to push her. This is what happens. You don't restrict the kids. You don't restrict the kids. This whole process is restricting to the kids. And again, if the kids don't want something displayed, why would you force them? Not saying they would not want it to be displayed. That's the point of them being in this creative field. That was the point. That was why I chose what I chose. I can ride around places in Sarasota and look at the projects that I did as a engineer from college, and they're still up today helping Sarasota. I did it because I was part of my job was I worked for the traffic engineering department. On my projects, my assignments, I completed my assignments, and that's what it was. They then put the construction in, they have the contractors go out, and they make it happen. We put the work in on the front side, somebody else does the work in on the back side, and we all can enjoy it together. There's no force fed, but that was part of me being me doing my job. Here, these kids have rights. If they choose to profit off their own work, great. You should support that. You should encourage that. But never once should you say that there's nothing that's gained or there's no financial gains by any of this, because that's false.
To the extent that, and based on this, we're going to look again at the agreement that we have people sign, because perhaps it's broader than, perhaps the language is broader than necessary to accomplish that.
He just said we're going to take another look. Maybe perhaps the language is broader than what it needs to be to accomplish a goal. I'm glad I got your attention, because that language is horrible. That language is horrible. And everybody else would see the language. As I presented to everybody in front of the board yesterday, that language that is actually being pushed to Booker High School, that's actually being pushed to the students once they're in Booker High School. Not one person stopped and objected to any of this. Not one person. So if it came from, matter of fact, it was sought out to find this, for one. So that told me it started and originated at Booker High School to reach out and find this kind of information. And once you got the information, you said, okay, that's great. So now we'll handle this. Again, this is the paper. I highlighted a lot of stuff for those on the board can actually see what it actually says instead of listening to somebody talk about it. Because I'm stating facts. When it says, and I'll just read some excerpts that I highlighted and I read to the panel yesterday. Works described below are works made for hire. Okay, really? Works made for hire. Then it says in here what is represented as the school. School Board of Sarasota County is represented as a school. It says also, to the extent that the work is not deemed work made for hire, I irrevocably assign and transfer to school and its affiliates and assigns in perpetuity, that means to death, all rights, title, and interest in and to the copyright. Okay, right? Language from any attorney. If you allow language in like this, that means it's binding. Once you sign it, it's binding. It's not hypotheticals. Well, we didn't mean for it. You put it in. What person looked over this? Where's the oversight? Where's the next person to read this at the high school level and say, well, this is a little bit too much? Then it says, again, the works. Say you don't want anything for these kids. You don't want to restrict them. The works shall mean any photographs, videos, sound recordings, editings, artworks, designs, images, scripts, text, performances, and other pictorial, graphic, and audiovisual works, or parts of a motion picture, including any contributions, revisions, changes, and modifications related to my relationship / engagement with Booker High School and its film and animation projects. Now I skipped along some more. It says the work shall constitute school's property solely and completely, and the school may alter, enhance, modify, transfer, license, key word in this one, license or sublicense the work at its sole discretion. Then it also went down a little bit more, and I highlighted this for all the panel members to read as well. I further agree to waive all so-called moral rights in the work. So if this was sought out by Booker High School, they got what they wanted. They got the attorneys to push it. They got somebody to come up with it. And Doug Cherry, this is not your fault. You did what they asked you to do. And so the school board got this back, and then they started to push it. And so it got back to Booker High School. That's how it's in my hands. If it didn't get back to Booker High School, if it didn't meet the right channels, it's in my hands, and I want to know how that happened. Now it's in my hands, so I, as a parent, I object to it wholeheartedly, and you should too. Again, you hear it says, he said the word may be broad. The words may be broad. Your broad wording, the dereliction of duty amongst all the players here, because apparently this is for your good, not the students at all. You have broad language from attorneys. You have broad language from educators. And now you say, well, maybe we should have fixed it. We trust in you, or we used to trust you. We used to trust you. Booker High School, you peddled this mess. If it was something that somebody at the landings did that came back down to these kids, you should have stopped it. You should have never let it leave the printer after reading it. So, who's at fault in this one? Booker High School was at fault. Sarasota County School Board. I guess Art Hardy, you helped push this as well. But now my son is the one that is directly affected because his father, knowing what contracts mean, would not allow this to happen. As I said in my meeting on September 23rd, I will never sign an agreement like this. No one should sign an agreement like this. No one should have their kids sign an agreement like this. Because what happens with this? Somebody can say what it won't mean, but guess what? That means nothing in a court of law. It means nothing in a court of law. This is actually a contract. It's not a waiver, as some people want to say. It's a waiver. No, it's not a waiver. It's not a release. It's not that. It's control. It's a contract that only one party benefits from. Now, again, I stated valid points in here. If you mention that you respect the parameters of other artists, why don't you respect the parameters of our kids? Why don't you stay within your guidelines or your little box and let our little people be creative and not restricted? If they choose to put something into the film festival, fine. If they don't choose to put something into the film festival, fine. What is wrong with that? Are we running a dictatorship now? These kids must make, not my son. Not my son.
That goal. The goal is not and has not been to say if an individual student paints a painting, that somehow the school board owns that painting. It's not to try to take things away from an individual other than in the context of these collaborative projects.
And let's not with the painting stuff. We're talking about the film program right now. Let's not make hypotheticals. Attorneys don't really make hypotheticals. They state facts. Truth tellers state facts. They don't try to mislead. So we're not talking about a painting. However, under this, if this agreement was signed, it says in here specifically, the works shall mean all photographs, videos, sound recordings, editings, artwork, designs, images. So, tell me where a painting would not fall in this category. Again, you painted a broad brush. My son is suffering because of the lack of due diligence on the behalf of Booker High School and Sarasota County Schools. That should be a problem with any parent. Listen to your words. You have admitted maybe we were just a little bit too overzealous with this thing right here. I think so.
Arguably maybe 30 or 40, I don't know how many students participate, could have some right. We don't want in that context there to be any issues about veto power over, well, I'm not going to give you my consent to do this. Again, hypotheticals over veto power. I'm not going to give you consent. Well, if there's agreed upon license from the kids to allow the school board or the school itself to use their work, that's an agreement. If they don't agree, well, that's an agreement too. There's no way you should be able to force anybody to do anything that they don't want to do. Listen to your words as an attorney, as somebody that's representing
the better interest or the best interest for our kids. If it's specific projects, for example, Stephen King wants these kids to come down and do a short story on his. Stephen King has a contract that the parents will be happy to sign because he has a positive reputation in that world. You don't have that reputation. He's seasoned in this. You are not. Understand your place in this matter. You are to help. You are not helping right now. You have actually caused harm to multiple students, because a lot of students and their parents know that this is just not right. But I'll be the one to speak. Matters less to me. My son has already been harmed and damaged. So now everybody will know what the issue is.
So I think to the extent that anybody is saying we're trying to profit off of this, that's inaccurate. That's the reason that we're doing it, is to try to broaden opportunities for students and the school. It's good. It's good for everyone when that happens. Like the one that went into the film festival last time.
You also said the reason for doing this is to broaden opportunities for the students and the school. They don't need your help. You said the reason why you're doing this is to broaden the opportunities for the students and the school. That is not true. You don't even understand the field that you're talking about to even express any kind of knowledge about it. So that is far from the truth. Booker High VPA was going strong a long time ago, and it's still going. Booker High VPA was around for a long time. It was around when I was in high school. Now my son is at the same high school because he wanted to be like his father and go to the same high school. And look how my high school is treating him.
So my question was, one, make sure that it's across all of the VPA programs. I don't know if there, and I don't want to make this a huge project necessarily, but if there are any other agreements that we require families, I just think it was a good educational experience, because if it can be such that it's not so broad that we aren't.
Well, and we'll look at that. And we also, I talked briefly yesterday to Mr. Cantis and Ms. Hartfixon and Ms. Kokoza about perhaps where else this is going on. I'm familiar with it in the VPA program at Booker, so we're going to look to see if there are other contexts in which are similar.
Just so that
it should be the same wherever we have similar circumstances. I think Booker is a unique program in many ways, but there may be some of the same issues going on elsewhere.
What tickles me a little bit is that he doesn't have an idea where else this thing is going on in Sarasota County. He said that there may be some of the same issues going on in other places. Either you don't know, you don't care to know, or this is solely an isolated scheme. Either way, if you work with legal contracts going throughout the school, I think you should know where they're going and who has them. So again, this points to the fact that A, it's specific to Booker High School animation and film, period, in Sarasota County. That's all you know. You handle the legal jargon. That's all you know. Sometimes the truth helps. When you don't know, say, I don't know. When you do know, say yes or no. So on this one, is it anywhere else? No. Only at Booker. Peace and love, folks. Protect the kids.